In my most recent video about the Assassin's Creed Valhalla story trailer, I went over some pretty delicious details, and one of them was so good that I just had to make an entire video going in depth about it, and that is the Cult of Mithras. So before we start, I just want to say that if you enjoyed today's video, to leave it a nice, thick, and juicy like as always. And of course, if you enjoy content like this, as well as my other content about Cyberpunk 2077, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, and Battlefield, then make sure you hit that big red sexy subscribe button right underneath the video. So the Cult of Mithras, who were they? In real life, because it's a real cult we're dealing with this time. And that makes everything so much more interesting because there's things we can draw from history that are going to tell us a good bit about this cult. And there's some pretty major details I want to go over. So a lot of people think that the Cult of Mithras is derived from the Persian Mitra or Mithra, which was a god in many religions in Persia, but I think is mostly associated with the Persian Mithra, who was the god of light. And while there is no actual connection between the two, if you look at it historically, because none of the members of the cult in Rome actually wrote anything down about themselves. Most of what we know about them is from archaeological findings, as well as what their enemies, which was mostly the early Christians, wrote about them. There doesn't appear to be any connection between the two. The way that he was worshipped in Rome, they don't connect very well, even though a lot of people in the late 19th and early 20th century championed that idea. But I think if you throw an Assassin's Creed veil over that, you can kind of see things start to make sense. If you go back to the time of Xerxes, then you can kind of see how a Persian who believes in the god Mitra as the god of light and is also a Templar-esque figure, and that kind of Templar idea starts to spread over to Rome, and then once the Roman Empire comes along, a cult to this god of light kind of comes along, and not only is he the god of light and that there's a cult, but the cult is made up of mostly military members despite accepting people from all walks of society, including slaves. There's a lot of connection there. There's a lot of potential for Assassin's Creed, for that to make sense, for that to be the kind of main line that leads all the way up and through to the Knights Templar that we know by the events of Assassin's Creed 1 and beyond. It makes a lot of sense. Another tiny detail is that the members of the Cult of Mithras had ranks. Now, these ranks were often associated with animals, the most common being the lion, just kind of like a nice middle rank, and very few people went beyond that. And at the head of those ranks was the pater, or father, and I think you can kind of see how father of understanding kind of comes in here as the leader of the cult. But I want to go back to the animal names, because if you remember back to Assassin's Creed Origins, which is where we actually see the Romans at the dawn of the Roman Empire, the members of the Order of the Ancients have nicknames associated with animals. You have guys like the hippo, the hyena, the lion, a lot of names like that. And of course, Caesar at the head, the father of understanding, although he's considered the father of understanding, he wasn't actually the leader of the Order of the Ancients. They just followed him and he kind of just directed them wherever he wanted. It's kind of a weird dynamic, but it worked. And then I think as time goes on, you have guys like Octavian right after the assassination of Caesar, who becomes a member of the Order of the Ancients. And you kind of see how that much more direct tie to the Order kind of brings about this Cult of Mithras around the 2nd century. Now, the cult in real life actually worshipped all over the place, all over the empire. There's places called Mithraeum, and that's where the cult would exclusively worship. And they had a ritual meal that they would do, and it's depicted within the Mithraeum with Mithras at the head, so it's kind of like he's at the head of the table guiding the meal. Now, of course, we don't actually know what all was going on in there. We know that there was initiations and things like that for new members who were initiates that would move through the ranks, but we don't actually know everything that went on down there. Now, going back to the Christians, who are kind of the enemies at the time, and applying Assassin's Creed kind of logic to it, the early Christians seem to be aligned with the assassins. There was a mysterious Roman assassin who went to Constantine and helped to get Christianity legalized in the empire. And then, of course, you have the writings of early Christian writers who were often accusing the ritual meal of the cult as a mocking of the Christian Eucharist, which was in its own right a ritual meal. And they kind of portrayed Mithras as this demonic or devilish kind of figure leading eating the meal in a way that was what was mocking the Christian Eucharist. And this accusation of devil worship, I guess you could consider it, kind of leads on to the fall of the real Knights Templar. If you remember the initial part of Assassin's Creed Unity, the opening sequence of it, you can see the assassin plot along with King Philip V of France at the time, and how they took down the Templars and drove them underground once again, and how there's some similarities to what happened to the Cult of Mithras. It seems like this event has repeated itself because there's several factors that are very, very similar. Number one, the Templars, much like the Cult of Mithras, in real life were accused of devil worship. In fact, there's a side mission later on in AC Unity where you can actually hunt down and assassinate Templars who are worshiping the devil in a cult underground near the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and that was a very real accusation towards Templars. Another thing that is connecting, well, I want you to pay attention to this idea of illumination. You see, like I was talking about earlier, Mithra in Persian mythology is the god of light. He's the one who brings light to the world. And if you apply that to the Templars, well, just take a watch.
Pope Clement, hear me? Before this year is out, you will answer for your crimes before God Almighty! And you, King Philip, no punishment is too heinous for the great evil you have inflicted upon the temple! I curse you! Curse you to the 13th generation of your blood! You shall be cursed!
Consumed in flames of hunger and wrath, thus came the age of true wisdom to a blistering close. The Knights Templar, once the proud shepherds of order, peace, and illumination, were no more.
Now, I'm sure you caught that because I pointed it out to you, but at the time it seemed like somewhat of a throwaway line, and it seems like it's being a bit retconned to have a bit more meaning to it in terms of who the Templars were. Obviously, it's not some life-changing, series-changing idea, but I think it gives us an idea as to how the Templars are viewing themselves, or beginning to view themselves at this point in time. You see, again, if you apply the idea that the Persian Mithra is influencing the Cult of Mithras and their version of the god Mithras, then you can see how this idea of light bringers comes to fruition. Not only that, but Mithra in a Persian sense was always in a conflict with the darkness. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you what shadowy figures operating in the dark are up against the Templars. So again, we have another connection that makes wonderful sense for Assassin's Creed. And again, I think this brings us to the way that the Templars are thinking in this time. Darby McDevitt in an interview already told us that the Templars have a different perspective on things at this point in time than how we know them in a modern sense. And I think what that is they feel themselves to be genuine light bringers, people who are bringing order to the world and subduing chaos. In fact, if you look at the Cult of Mithras and the statue of Mithras that we see not only in the trailer but in real life, it's the ideal Roman stabbing a bull with a sword. Now, if you view this in a symbolic sense, the ideal Roman is order. He is everything that the Romans want and what they want to be. And if you view the sword as power and light, then he is subduing the chaos that is the bull. It's very powerful, it's very symbolic, and it makes just such perfect sense. It's almost crazy how much sense it makes. It takes me back to the days of the Ezio trilogy where things just made too much sense to where you felt like this could have happened in real life, even though it definitely didn't. It just makes so much perfect sense that it works in such an insane way, and everything lines up so well that you're just like convincing yourself like, nope, they're on to something. Darby is a real life Templar or something. It makes too good a sense how everything just comes together like this. Now, of course, the Cult of Mithras was driven underground in the 5th century, much like the Knights Templar were driven underground in the 13th century. And while I've already described how they were driven underground and kind of run out of town by the assassins, it seems like it's an event that repeats itself over time, and each time they come back in a semi-public sense, they are driven under once again. It's very, very fascinating concept they have here with this cult and what they stand for, and how they could be a very compelling version of the Templars. And I wonder, with this option of choices in this game that seem like they're actually going to matter, if possibly, as I've talked about in videos before, we could join the Templars. If the argument is good enough, will we be able to? Or will we be forced to join up with the assassins once again? I don't know. Eivor is a leader of a settlement. He's a leader of his people, and I think one of the ways that we're going to have to choose our story to end is not only for Eivor's destiny, but in how to govern our people. And I think that Eivor will have the option to see that order and subduing the chaos is the way to go, or he'll have the idea that freedom and allowing people to be who they are will create its own peace without the need to suppress everyone with extreme laws and strict suppression or oppression. So that's my thoughts on the Cult of Mithras and who they are, what they bring to the table, and why they tie in so perfectly with this game and with this series, and how they're going to bring a unique perspective to this game. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it this far, remember to leave it a nice, thick, and juicy like as always. And of course, I'll see you guys in the next video.